Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is the Presidents of the United States of America Poetic Tour. Number 1. George Washington. General George Washington led the Continental Army to victory against Great Britain in the U.S. War of Independence. Washington was a good, humble man and always gave credit for the national triumph to Providence. 2. John Adams. John Adams believed the American Revolution was a war that needed to be fought and could be won. His time on earth was dedicated to national service, which did not end until his life was done. 3. Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson's contributions were legendary. All men are created equal, and freedom of religion. A great lover of books and learning himself, an inspiring example of the power of education. 4. James Madison. He dedicated himself to the study of government in history. As a result of his work, the United States became one country through the creation of the U.S. Constitution. A big help for Thomas Jefferson, he later became the 4th U.S. President. His name was James Madison. 5. James Monroe. When the British burned Washington, D.C. in August 1814, it was a dark time in American history. James Monroe, Secretary of State and War, rallied the country and organized forces which led to, in New Orleans, in January 1815, a mighty and decisive victory. 6. John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams was a great warrior who fought long and hard against African American slavery. The peculiar institution had to go. It was a horrific contradiction of American liberty. 7. Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was a heroic leader at the great victory against the British in New Orleans in January 1815. The British needed to be taught a lesson. They had been abusive and kidnapping American sailors, something which is really mean. 8. Martin Van Buren. They called Martin Van Buren the Little Magician, but it really just took a lot of hard work when he created the modern Democratic Party, a complex organization and vital component for what the world today calls American democracy. 9. William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison was the great hero at the famous battle at Tippecanoe, Indiana. This victory weakened the Indian Confederation, organized to stop American expansion, led by the mighty Shawnee warrior Tecumseh. 10. John Tyler. Tippecanoe and Tyler too was a famous slogan during the U.S. presidential campaign of 1840. After a month in office, President Harrison died, and John Tyler served as president for the rest of the 4-year term. He helped bring into the United States Texas and Hawaii. 11. James K. Polk. James K. Polk prosecuted the Mexican War, which brought into the U.S. Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, and California, the entire Southwest. He worked tirelessly. 1 term was enough. He was dead 3 months after leaving office. Polk gave everything for his country. He really did his best. 12. Zachary Taylor. Zachary Taylor was a hero in the Mexican War. They called him Old Rough and Ready. He wore lousy clothes and was very calm during battles, kind of like Jar Jar Binks of Star Wars, who, before a military confrontation, famously said, "Steady, steady." 13. Millard Fillmore. In 1852, U.S. President Millard Fillmore ordered Commodore Matthew Perry and the U.S. Navy to open the Hermit Kingdom of Japan to international trade. Since then, it's mind-boggling to think about all the products around the world that have had the label "In Japan Made." 14. Franklin Pierce. There's a nice painting of Franklin Pierce and his good friend Nathaniel Hawthorne strolling under the Arch of Titus in the Forum in Rome. His presidency was over. Pierce was retired. He wanted to enjoy himself, away from home. 15. James Buchanan. When the Confederate States in the South seceded from the United States, President Buchanan said there was nothing to be done. Preserving the Union was left to his successor. After all, waging a civil war is no fun. 16. Abraham Lincoln. He won the Civil War, ended African American slavery, and kept the United States one. Then Lincoln was shot and killed 6 days after the war ended. His life's work done. 17. Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson grew up in extreme poverty and never went to school. However, he worked hard. As an adult, learned how to read and write, became successful in business and politics, and proved that he was no fool. 18. Ulysses S. Grant. Grant's tomb in New York City is no longer a popular sight to be seen. All the people who loved Grant have died. He's been forgotten. I think that's really mean. 19. Rutherford B. Hayes. Rutherford B. Hayes. They called him Old Rudd. He overcame severe depression. Just imagine, he didn't even have yoga meditation. 20. James A. Garfield. James A. Garfield was torn between the field of politics and that of learning. Sure, the exercise of power can be fascinating, but is it really more interesting than intellectual yearning? 21. Chester A. Arthur. Chester A. Arthur was considered a dandy, a New York politician with a reputation for corruption. However, as U.S. President, he surprised people and left office with a very favorable reputation. 22. And 24. Grover Cleveland. The only U.S. president to serve non-consecutive terms, Grover Cleveland was the 22nd and 24th president. He was a Democrat and a conservative icon, and really lived a life without precedent. 23. Benjamin Harrison. Benjamin Harrison was the grandson of the 9th U.S. President, William Henry Harrison. He strengthened and modernized the U.S. Navy and worked to enforce voting rights for those who were African American. 25. William McKinley. William McKinley brought the United States to the Philippines in 1898. The beginning of a wonderful friendship between Americans and Filipinos, something that's really, really great. 26. Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt was the driving force behind the construction of the Panama Canal. He almost died on a journey of exploration in the Amazon rainforest and was everybody's pal. 27. William Howard Taft. At 340 pounds, Big Bill Taft, among American presidents, was the most heavy. He was also U.S. governor in the Philippines and was popular with Filipinos for his kindness, sense of justice, and temperament, which was steady. 28. Woodrow Wilson. During Woodrow Wilson's time in office, the Federal Reserve became law, as well as the federal income tax. Corruption in banking, inflation, the rise of big government, something Ronald Reagan dedicated himself to getting off the people's backs. 29. Warren Harding. Marion, Ohio native, Warren Harding was considered the most handsome U.S. president. He was elected in 1920, the first time American women could vote, and not just make a political comment. 30. Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge was the quietest president. They called him Silent Cal. He was a small government conservative. For those similarly inclined today, he is their historical pal. 31. Herbert Hoover. Liberals like to blame Herbert Hoover for not doing enough to help during the early years of the Great Depression. Conservatives argue that Hoover did too much, creating business confusion, which prolonged the economic crisis caused by government intervention. 32. Franklin D. Roosevelt. Happy Days Are Here Again was Franklin D. Roosevelt's 1932 U.S. presidential campaign song. For liberals, he is a big hero. However, if FDR was so amazing, why did the Great Depression last so long? 33. Harry Truman. Harry Truman's famous comment about presidential responsibility was, "The buck stops here." He was the first president to face the overwhelming issue of international communism, something very troubling and easy to fear. 34. Dwight Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower was the supreme Allied commander on D-Day, the invasion in France at Normandy, June 6, 1944. There were 10,000 Allied casualties that day, 2,500 dead. In the West, in Europe, it was the beginning of the Ground War. 35. John F. Kennedy. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. January 20th, 1961, Washington, D.C. The inauguration of the 35th U.S. President, and inspiring words of selfless service by John F. Kennedy. 36. Lyndon B. Johnson. A great champion of equal rights for African Americans, the 36th President, Lyndon B. Johnson. The overwhelming challenges of the war in Vietnam was his undoing, and by 1968, his political effectiveness was done. 37. Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon established the Environmental Protection Agency, also known as the EPA. Nature lovers were thrilled. It really made their day. 38. Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford became U.S. President at the end of the political scandal known as Watergate. He was in office on April 30th, 1975, the day Saigon, South Vietnam fell to the North Vietnamese. In American history, a very sad date. 39. Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter faced some tough international challenges, like the American hostage crisis in Iran and the Soviet Union invasion of Afghanistan. 40. Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was a great warrior against communism. He challenged the Soviet Union to tear down the Berlin Wall. His policies were effective and helped to destroy communism and bring about its decline and fall. 41. George H.W. Bush. The dictator Saddam Hussein organized a brutal invasion of Kuwait in 1990 by his army, that of Iraq. The following year, U.S. President George H.W. Bush led an international coalition to restore Kuwait's freedom and independence. It was the hour of need for the Kuwaiti people, and George Bush had their back. 42. Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was a very knowledgeable president with a very charismatic personality. His wife was a political partner, the first woman nominated by a major party for U.S. president, and her name is Hillary. 43. George W. Bush. George W. Bush's time in the Oval Office saw the 9/11 terrorist attacks and the U.S. invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. 18 years later, the U.S. military is still in Afghanistan. One wonders when the troops can all come home and stay home and really be back. 44. Barack Obama. Barack Obama was very international. His father was from Kenya in East Africa. Most of Obama's childhood was in Hawaii, but from ages 6 to 10, he lived in Indonesia. 45. Donald Trump. Donald Trump purchased the New Jersey Generals in the United States Football League in 1983. The team signed Cleveland quarterback Brian Sipe, and for Browns fans, that was something that was hard to see. Well, that concludes today's presentation. You might consider checking out our website, Adventures in History with Peter J. Ray at peterjray.com. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.